Hi, my name is Will, and this is my presentation on gaming, history, and society. So, for a basic introduction, um, gaming really hasn't existed for long. Origins can be traced back to the late 40s, early 50s, around there. It originated as basic simulations. It was mostly for research purposes, essentially. Um, Over time, as tech advanced, the complexity and impact also increased with it. Now, for origins, like I stated before, the first games came into existence in the 1950s, and we have several good examples here. I'll start with Claude Shannon and Alan Turing, both very familiar names. They both created chess programs for early computers. Another good example would be A.S. Douglas. He coded a game called OXO, or as we know it, tic-tac-toe, for Cambridge University's EDSAC computer. Again, this was for mostly research purposes. Another more odd example would be programmers from Los Alamos, a very historically significant nuclear test site. They created virtual blackjack for the IBM 701. One more example would be Arthur Samuel. He coded a checkers program which would actually go on to beat a checkers master, funnily enough. Now, overall, these were very simple. They accomplished much in terms of the simple tech compared to today. And like I have stated before, this was not mainstream. This was mostly research and demonstrative. The first cultural impact a game had would be Space War. This was originally created by MIT for the PDP-1 microcomputer. Essentially, because the PDP-1 was widely adapted by university campuses and laboratories, the game actually had a bit of a following. MIT students actually made and coded control boxes so you could interface with the game. Now, funnily enough, one of our own U of U students, his name was Nolan Bushnell, saw potential in this game, and he went on to develop a coin-operated version called Computer Space, which wasn't a success by any means. Even though it wasn't a success, it would essentially set the benchmark for the coin-operated game. Bushnell would go on to co-found Atari. So Atari would essentially usher in the start of the arcade era with a game called Pong. This was developed in 1972 by Atari themselves. It was a very simple, very minimalistic ping pong game. This would be the first coin-operated game to become a success. Even though in the beginning, when they proposed it to certain companies, they really had no interest. So what they did, or at least the legend goes, they installed it in a local bar, and the machine would actually go on to fail because of how many coins were actually jammed into it. This essentially created the coin-operated industry. Another era of digital gaming during that time period would be the start of the home console. Now, this would be with the Magnavox Odyssey, which was developed by Ralph Baer, and his group called the TD Game Project. The prototype, called the Brown Box, was completed in 1968. The first ever patent was actually issued to Baer for a home gaming apparatus. That was definitely interesting. A couple years later, a company called Magnavox actually acquired the rights, and they released this console in 1972 as the Odyssey. This was historically the first ever home game console. Now, Atari saw this idea, and they would improve on it with Pong. Here we'll see the advancement and the downfall of home gaming. Now, what started this rise and fall was the creation of interchangeable game cartridges. We have three consoles I'm going to mention here, the main three, which would be the Atari 2600, we have the Intellivision, and we have the ColecoVision. Now, because these had interchangeable cartridges, this meant you could change games and you could amass your own collection of games, essentially. Now, because of this, many companies, they saw this opportunity and they took it. So the market ended up becoming oversaturated completely with games. A lot of these were low quality. So this created a big crash with several companies ending up going bankrupt. And because of this, computer gaming became kind of competition. Now here is where we look at computer gaming. We have three main computers I'm going to look at here. We have the Commodore 64, we have the Apple II, and we have the TRS-80. Now, these computers, they retained all the regular functions of a home computer, but they all had cartridge slots. So you could actually game on these too. It was a very revolutionary combination. The advent of such flexibility ushered in new genres like the interactive adventure game, like Zork, for example. And here is where we see the return of the consoles with Nintendo. These guys had already been very big in the coin-operated business. They'd have very successful games, such as Donkey Kong and other stuff like that. And their first foray into the home console was the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, this was introduced during 1985. Among other things, its graphics rivaled PCs at the time. Another very revolutionary feature was the introduction of the save file. So if something happened, if you died, if a game crashed, you could go back to that file instead of restarting the game entirely. This was very interesting to see. And along with the NES came cult classics like Super Mario Bros., Legend of Zelda, and the Final Fantasy series. Now, because of this coming to light, this would set the ball rolling for modern consoles. And here's where we get to modern gaming. The two main console series I'm going to feature are the Xbox and the PlayStation. As we can see, we have the original Xbox, the 360 and its variants, the Xbox One, the One X, and the Series X. Then we have the original PlayStation, the 2, 3, 4, and 5. The PlayStation was introduced in 1995, and the original Xbox was introduced in 2001. And then we also have a big update for PCs in the form of Steam. This was a distribution center where you could buy, download, play, and sell games, essentially. It was very big. Now, with all of these updates in the form of consoles and PCs, this brought in several amazing advancements. We have graphics, frame rate, and audio. These all exponentially improved. They became a lot more appealing. We have multiplayer being a mainstream feature now. This created much better bonds for gaming communities because they were able to play each other without being in the same room. This was very revolutionary. And even more genres were created and expanded upon. Excuse me, I have technical difficulty here.
Sorry.
Last one. Sorry about that. Just a little bit of an issue there. In conclusion, even though digital gaming's origins can be traced back to laboratories and campuses for research and demonstrative purposes, you can't really deny the impact they've had on society as a form of mass media. Essentially, just looking at them, the industry's worth billions of dollars. There have been mental benefits that have been shown in studies. They become a pastime, a hobby, and even a profession for many. And the community overall has become massive. That's it pretty much. Thank you very much. Any questions?
So how do games that were a lot more primitive, like say pinball machines, fit into the history of gaming? You mentioned coin-operated units.
So those would be the predecessors, actually. Pong was actually presented to companies who owned, operated, and manufactured those more analog games. And they were the ones who didn't actually have any interest, which I found interesting. They didn't really move on with the times, I guess. Any other questions?
With the more primitive 40s and 50s sort of computers, how would they display information? Was it through like would it print out? Was there a display like?
It was. I didn't look into that too much. I'll come back to you with an answer on that later. I appreciate the question though. That's it.
Thanks.
Thank you.